Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games and part 2 of my How to Play Warhammer 40k series. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll be taking you through the datasheets. In part 1 we went through the introduction and key concepts, but now it's time to look at one of my favourite parts of the game, the datasheets, and this is where we're going to learn all about our different units and their individual rules. Each unit has a datasheet that lists the characteristics, war gear and abilities of its models. You'll find datasheets for all your units in the different codexes for the different factions, but you'll also find a condensed version of a model's datasheet in its construction guide, but this will contain less information than the full version. Right, let's get started, and the datasheet I've chosen for this example is the Assault Intercessor Squad. The first thing to look at is the text at the top left hand corner, and this is where you'll find the name of the unit. Next you'll see a logo in the top right hand corner, and this is the battlefield role. Now this will be used primarily when making what's called a battle forged army, and you don't need to know about that for the basic rules, but if you want to start going into more in-depth rules you can find all about this in the Warhammer 40,000 core book. We do need this next part though. This is the power rating, and the higher this is, the more powerful the unit will be. When you put together your army, it'll have a power rating, and so for example you'll have a power rating of 50, so you know how many units you can fit in that total power value. Now we're on to the profiles, and this is going to tell you all about the units, and so here we've got both the Assault Intercessor and the Assault Intercessor Sergeant. On the left hand side we've got the number column, and so this tells us we have to have 4 to 9 Assault Intercessors and 1 Assault Intercessor Sergeant in our unit. Then as we work along we've got the different letters that tell us about each characteristic. So M represents move, and this is the speed at which a model moves across the battlefield. You'll notice that some models might have just a dash instead of a number, and this means that they won't be able to move at all. Next we've got WS, and this stands for weapon skill, and this tells you a model's skill at hand-to-hand fighting, and if a model has a weapon skill with just a dash in there, then that means it's not able to fight in hand-to-hand combat. Next is BS, and this is ballistic skill, and this shows how accurate a model is when shooting with ranged weapons, and if a model has a ballistic skill with just a dash there and no number, it means it has no proficiency with ranged weapons and cannot make attacks with ranged weapons at all. Next is S, which stands for strength, and this indicates how physically strong a model is and how likely it is to inflict damage in hand-to-hand combat. Then we're on to T for toughness, which reflects the model's resilience against physical harm. W is for wounds, and wounds show how much damage a model can sustain before it succumbs to its injuries. A represents attacks, and this tells us how many times a model can strike blows in hand-to-hand combat, and if a model has an attacks value with just a dash there and no number, that means it's unable to fight in melee at all. Now we're on to LD, which stands for leadership, and this reveals how courageous, determined or self-controlled a model is. And the final characteristic in the profile is SV, which stands for save, and this indicates the protection a model's armour gives them. Now we're on to composition and war gear, and if it doesn't tell you in the profile how many models are in the unit, then you'll see it here in this section of the datasheet. It's also going to tell you the default weapons and the war gear the models are equipped with. And it will also say sometimes, like you can see here, if there's 6 or more models, then it's going to have a different power rating. And in this example, that power rating will go from 5 to a 10. Now we're on to abilities, and many units will have 1 or more special abilities. Now they'll be described here, or they direct you to a page within the codex so you can find out more information. And here I've shown some examples of those Angels of Death ability and Combat Squads ability so you can get an idea of what they look like. Now we're on to the weapons, and here we can see that they've also got some characteristics. So let's start working through them. So first of all, we've got the name of the weapon. Then we've got the range, and this tells us how far the weapon can shoot. And weapons with a range of melee are melee weapons and can only be used in hand-to-hand combat. All other weapons will be range weapons, and some weapons have a minimum and maximum range, for example 6 inches to 48 inches, and such weapons cannot target units that are wholly within that shorter range. Next we've got the type of weapon, and these are all going to be explained in the shooting and fight phases of these basic rules videos. Then as we work our way to the right of the weapon profile, we've got S, and this stands for strength, and this is how likely the weapon is to wound an enemy model. If a weapon's strength lists user, as you can see here with the Astartes chainsword, then it is equal to the bearer's strength characteristic from their profile that we saw earlier. If a weapon lists a modifier, for example +1 or ×2, modify the bearer's strength characteristic as shown. Next we've got AP. This stands for armor penetration, and this tells us how good the weapon's attacks are at getting through armor. You'll find out more about the AP in later videos. Then we have D, which stands for damage. This is the amount of damage inflicted by a successful wound. That brings us to the final column in this section, which are the abilities of the weapon. And if any abilities apply to attacks made with this weapon profile, then you'll find them listed here. Now we're on to war gear options, and some datasheets will have a bullet pointed list of war gear options. And when you include such a unit in your army, you can use these options to change the weapons and other war gear of models in the unit. The order you use these options in does not matter, but each can only be used once. Some war gear is going to be in a different section of each codex. I've just included a section here from the Space Marines codex so you can see what that looks like. It will tell you the different type of war gear and then the points value that you would have to add on if you're playing that type of game. Now we're on to the keywords, and datasheets will have a list of keywords separated into faction keywords and other keywords, and the former can be used to help guide which models to include in an army, but otherwise both sets of keywords are functionally the same, and you'll see them cropping up in various rules throughout the game. As well as the regular full datasheet that we just went through, you'll find condensed datasheets in the instruction guides of many of the models, and these use lots of different logos to represent the different characteristics, and this is so that it can apply to all different languages. And so if you really want to be using the full datasheets, I think to get the full benefit and every single piece of information about each unit. Now we've seen the datasheet and gone through all the different sections of it, let's talk about modifying characteristics. Many rules modify the characteristics of your models and their weapons, and as we talked about in part 1, all modifiers to a characteristic are cumulative and you must apply them in a certain order. As we saw earlier, some characteristics will just have a dash in place of a number, and this means they can never be modified. That now brings us to the end of part 2 of this How to Play Warhammer 40k series, and so now we've gone through the datasheets. It'd be awesome if you come and join me for part 3, where we begin the battle round and start looking at the command phase. I hope you enjoyed the video and this gave you a good introduction to datasheets. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the next parts of this series. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone that's helped make this series possible, and so thanks to everyone who's either provided a product or sponsored this video series. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much. I'll put links in the description below to everyone who's contributed to the series, and I'd love it if you went and checked out their websites and supported their work. I'd like to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make these daily videos possible, and if you're interested in joining the community, it'd be awesome to see you there, and I'll put a link for that in the description down below.